Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now, this came out in 1985, and this is obviously a sequel to the 1984 horror classic A Nightmare on Elm Street, which was written and directed by Wes Craven. Now, I already reviewed this movie along with all the other Nightmare on Elm Street films all the way back in 2011 for Season 1 of Horror Month. Those reviews are still up, however they're no longer public, but you can still see them on the Horror Month Season 1 playlist, which I'll leave a link to in the description below. And I also recently re-reviewed the first movie. Now, Freddy's Revenge was written by David Chaskin, and I remember hearing that Wes Craven was going to come back and direct, but he hated the script, and he thought it was kind of a betrayal of what he set up in the first movie. But I also think it was because he never really wanted there to be sequels to A Nightmare on Elm Street. He wanted it to be a standalone film, and I think he really resented that they were turning his movie into a franchise. So this time around, the film was directed by Sholder, who prior to this directed a movie called Alone in the Dark, which was an early New Line Cinema movie, and he would go on to direct an excellent sci-fi horror film called The Hidden, which might actually be his best movie if we're being honest, and he directed Wishmaster 2. Now, Sholder, I think, did this movie purely as a director for hire because I think he even admitted that he was not a fan of the first movie. Now, Freddy's Revenge for the longest time was considered to be sort of the black sheep of the franchise. A lot of fans did not like how it took the story in a wildly different direction, and a lot of the sequels that came after this would more or less ignore this one, making it almost a standalone Nightmare on Elm Street movie. But over the years, especially in recent years, the film has garnered a cult following, and it does actually have a pretty devoted fan base. This movie is also considered, and I do not mean this in a derogatory way, even though I know there are some people out there who probably would mean this in a derogatory way, but this is considered to be the gay Nightmare on Elm Street movie. The film has a lot of homoerotic undertones and in some cases overtones. A lot of it I do think was accidental, but some of it when you watch the movie you're like, okay, there was clearly something going on here. Now, I remember hearing that the writer, David Chaskin, was gay, but I don't know that for sure. But of course, the lead actor, Mark Patton, who plays Jesse in the movie, is gay in real life. However, that wasn't known at the time, because this being the 80s, he tried to keep that closeted. Now, Mark Patton was ashamed of the movie at first, but in recent years, he has embraced the film and is now proud of the film and proud of its legacy, because A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 has become kind of a cult film among gay horror fans. And Mark Patton has become kind of a minor gay icon. Now, I'm heterosexual, but I could still appreciate something like that, and I think that's pretty cool, honestly. Now, I love A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2. I don't like it as much as the original, but I actually really appreciate, and I thought it was very brave of them to go in such a wildly different direction when this only came out less than a year after the first one. Now, I first saw this movie when I was 10. I saw it only a few months after I saw the first one, and I loved it at that age, but I didn't know at that time that this was considered to be one of the quote-unquote bad ones, and of course I didn't pick up on the subtext until I was much older, but you know what? The subtext in the film, whether it was intended or not, actually does make me appreciate the movie even more. Now, I don't think it's a perfect movie, and you could argue that the way it handles some of the subtext might be a little problematic by today's standards, but I'll get into that. But I do really like how this is almost more of a body horror film. Now, you could argue that it's a bad sequel to the first movie, but as a standalone horror film, I think it's a really unique film. Now, the plot of A Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is it's set 5 years after the events of the first movie, meaning that this film is technically in the future, although some fans have speculated that the first one is actually set in 1981, which would set this movie in 1986. We follow a 17-year-old boy named Jesse Walsh who moves in with his family to the same house that Nancy lived in 5 years earlier. And Jesse starts having nightmares about Freddy Krueger, but of course he doesn't know yet who or what this man in his dreams is. But eventually he finds Nancy's diary, and eventually Jesse learns that this man in his dreams is the spirit of a dead child murderer. And it turns out that Freddy Krueger, in order to bring himself back from hell, has to take possession of Jesse's body, which would allow him to exist in the real world and use his supernatural powers in the real world. So now Jesse has to figure out how to stop this before he becomes one with the Dream Demon forever. So the film stars Mark Patton, who is very sympathetic as Jesse Walsh. Admittedly, there are moments where Patton's acting is a little questionable, but for the most part, I think he does a really good job. And you feel so bad for this kid, and it's actually a really psychological performance where Jesse doesn't know if he's going crazy or if there really is a supernatural force trying to take possession of him. And when Freddy uses Jesse to kill people, you see him racked with guilt. Now, while the film never outright says that Jesse is gay, a lot of fans of the film have sort of reinterpreted and recontextualized the film and now view Jesse as a gay character. Now, while Jesse does have a girlfriend in the movie, Lisa, you could look at that as more of a platonic love or the relationship being a little more one-sided. Now, a lot of people have read Freddy in the movie as being a representation of Jesse's latent homosexuality, but where that interpretation can be a little problematic is the fact that Freddy is the villain of the film. So is the movie saying that being gay is a bad thing? And the ending of the film where Lisa helps Jesse beat Freddy, that could almost be interpreted as a woman's love helping to beat the gay, which, okay, that is a pretty messed up interpretation. Again, if you interpret the film that way. I interpret Freddy in the movie as representing more so what happens when you repress things like that, when you keep these things hidden. But I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that while the gay subtext in the movie, while some of it might have been intentional, I think a lot of it was unintentional. And while I do like this movie, it is not the most well-written film in the world, so I think the message of the film is honestly a little confused. And of course you have Robert Englund reprising his role as Freddy Krueger, and he of course is great in the movie. Now originally he wasn't going to come back because New Line didn't want to pay him the money he was asking for, and they were going to go with somebody else, and there are a few shots of Freddy in the movie where it is this other guy, but apparently the other actor they got, who I think was a stuntman, I don't think he was an actual actor, apparently he was awful. And eventually New Line shut the fuck up and they paid Robert the money he was asking for. But if they did not bring Robert Englund back, it's hard to say if the franchise would have even continued after this. And while the film is a little more campy than the first one, Freddy is still genuinely pretty creepy in this movie, and I loved his makeup in the film. Like, in the movie they give Freddy an almost skeletal look, and his skin also has a weird slimy wet texture, which is really creepy and off-putting. Now, the makeup effects in the film were done by Kevin Yeager, I'm not really sure how to say his last name, but he would go on to design the puppet for Chucky in Child's Play, and he also designed the puppet for the Crypt Keeper in Tales from the Crypt. I also think it's interesting that when Freddy takes possession of Jesse, and Jesse seems to physically transform into Freddy in the real world, on his hand, instead of the glove, we see like knives growing out of the hand, and it almost looks like the skin has grown over the glove. It's really weird, like it adds to the sort of body horror element of the film. And Freddy's almost more animalistic in this one. Like there's a scene where Lisa is running from him and she trips and falls, and then he violently bites her on the leg. You also have Kim Myers as Lisa, who's a pretty likable character, somewhat two-dimensional, but Kim Myers does do a pretty good job in the movie. You also have Robert Rusler, who people might recognize from Weird Science as Ron Grady, who's probably my favorite character in the movie, and it's not that he's the most well-developed or complex character in the world, I just always found Ron to be a pretty likable character. Like, he starts out as kind of a bully, but as the movie goes on, him and Jesse do become friends, and you can tell that they do genuinely care for each other. And again, there certainly is some subtext that you could read into their relationship. And then you have Marshall Bell as Coach Snyder, who is essentially the film's secondary antagonist. And the character actually is gay, they state it in the movie, and this is where you could accuse the film of maybe having a homophobic undertone, is the fact that Coach Snyder is portrayed as a very predatory character. And the fact that he sort of preys on his students, not that people like him don't exist, but it does sort of add to a lot of really unfortunate stereotypes about gay people that unfortunately some people still believe to this day. You also have Gulager and Hope Lange as Jesse's parents. There's also a cameo of Bob Shea as a bartender at this gay bar that Jesse wanders into in one scene. Like I said, as much as I think a lot of the gay subtext was kind of unintentional, it seems like this where you realize, okay, there was definitely something intended here. But really, the scene's just worth it to see Robert Shaye in a leather apron. And you really gotta hand it to the special effects team in this movie. The special effects in this movie is amazing, especially in the scene where you see Freddy burst out of Jesse's body. Like, that is a brilliant scene of pure body horror. And there are some genuinely creepy scenes and shots in this movie. Like, there's a scene where Jesse is looking out his kitchen window and he sees Freddy in the bushes, and I've always found little moments like that, not just in this movie, but any kind of horror film where you think you see something, but you're not sure if you saw something. I've always found moments like that to be so creepy. Or when Jesse goes into his sister's room and we see her skipping rope singing 1-2 Freddy's Coming For You, that is also really creepy. Now, while the movie does try to maintain some of the creepy tone of the first one, I will say towards the end when you see Freddy at the pool party killing all the party guests, it does kind of take away from the scariness of Freddy when you just see him out there in the open slicing up the kids at the pool party like he's some monster on the loose. That being said, I probably would be scared shitless if I were one of those party guests, but that's also a huge point of contention about this movie among fans, is you see Freddy when he's at the party clearly using supernatural powers, yet it's supposed to be in the real world. First of all, sorry about the dramatic change in lighting. I'm recording this part of the video at a later time in the day. But yeah, I really like A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. It's not a perfect movie by any means. It is deeply flawed. There are times where it's sort of tonally inconsistent. There are times where the acting is questionable. And I do think the film is somewhat confused in terms of what it's trying to say about the subtext. At the same time, I actually really respect this movie for doing something wildly different from the first one, and I liked that this movie took the Freddy Krueger concept and used that to tell a really unique possession/body horror story. The movie also has some gorgeous cinematography, especially this one shot of Lisa going into the boiler room, and there's sort of this aerial shot, and it's absolutely beautiful. And I actually really like Christopher Young's score for the movie. It doesn't hold a candle to Charles Bernstein's score for the first movie, but I actually think the music in this movie is really eerie and fits the tone of the film really well. And speaking of music, it is a stupid scene, but I'll admit, I love the scene where Jesse is cleaning his room while dancing to the Fonda Ray song, and that is another example in the movie of the gay subtext, and even though I think some of the subtext was definitely accidental, that scene definitely makes you think, okay, some of this was intentional. Now, while this movie did well when it came out, fans of the first movie were disappointed, and while the first movie was well reviewed by critics, critics absolutely savaged this film. And like I said, pretty much all the Nightmare on Elm Street sequels that followed this would basically ignore the events of this one. At the same time, though, there's really nothing in the later Nightmare on Elm Street films that necessarily contradicts this one, so I would still like to think of Nightmare 2 as canon. I mean, yes, if this movie movie is in continuity, it does make you wonder how come Freddy never tried this again. Maybe he could only do it once, or maybe he only needed to possess Jesse in order to free him from the house or something, or free him from hell. I'm splitting hairs here, I know, but again, I still like to think of this movie as being in canon with the other films. And there were a few flashbacks to this movie at the beginning of Freddy vs. Jason. In 2012, Mark Patton wrote a book called Jesse's Lost Journal, which acted as a sequel to this movie. It does kind of ignore the events of the other Nightmare on Elm Street sequels, but according to Mark Patton, that is the official story of what happened to Jesse following the events of this movie. But whether you want to count it as canon, that is highly debatable. Now, this movie seems to have had an influence on Hello Mary Lou Prom Night 2. Now, Mark Patton's life was the subject of a really good 2020 documentary called Scream Queen, My Nightmare on Elm Street, which I highly recommend. And Mark Patton is actually a pretty interesting guy, and the documentary is incredibly moving. Now, back in 2018, I did an almost 3-hour-long retrospective on the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise with some friends of mine, including my late friend Chris. So I decided to end this video off by playing the part of that retrospective where we talked about Nightmare 2. But before I play that, enjoy this little Freddy skit that I made in 2015. Well, let's start now with the first Nightmare on Elm Street sequel, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now, Nightmare 2, I think, is a very underrated sequel. I don't like it as much as the first one, but I think it does go in a different direction, which I really appreciated about this film. And I actually think it's actually a pretty subversive film. There's a lot of undertones in the film, which, of course, we're going to talk about. But what do you think of Nightmare 2?
Well, I'll tell you, I saw it originally when it came out, and I remember being very disappointed in it. I mean, I was a teenager when I saw it. I was very disappointed in it. You know, I really loved the first movie. Very disappointed in the second one, except for, like, the pool party scene. I thought that was neat, you know. And I kind of dismissed it until later on when I saw the documentary about Nightmare on Elm Street, the series, and the director talked about sort of those subversive themes and everything. And I was like, wow, and then rewatching the film, I was like, wow, actually, it's very good. You know, it's like one of those examples where sometimes when you get additional information or context, it changes your viewing. It really changes your opinion about something. I think that's what really happened with this film. Now, I agree with you. Now, I really look at it now and see, wow, it's actually really interesting things going on in this film.
Jeremy, what do you think of Nightmare 2?
Yeah, I mean, I like it. You know, I know a lot of other people hate it, and I think the main reason for that is because it kind of broke the rules, as they say, you know, because a lot of it is Freddy coming into the real world.
Well, you gotta understand,
Jesse,
this is still early in the franchise.
I mean, I still like it.
Yeah, my interpretation of Freddy being able to use his powers in the real world was, okay, since he's possessing Jesse, he's able to use some of his dream powers in the real world now.
I mean, I get that, and, you know, like I said, I still enjoy the movie, you know, I definitely think I like how Freddy was still dark and terrifying in this movie, unlike in later sequels, you know, and yeah, it has some great scenes, you know, especially the part where he, you know, just comes at Jesse and kills Grady.
That's actually something I want to point out, is I feel like this one has a real body horror theme to it, and
that scene is just so horrific and so, you know, good for this movie, perfect for this movie. You know, you see the eye in his throat, and then you see the knives slowly and painfully coming out of his fingers, and then Freddy just rips out of him.
Right. And it's funny because it's like, but it goes back to something you were saying about the first movie, Christian, is where you have scenes like that, and then you have scenes of, like, you know, canaries bursting into flame. Yeah. Like, the tone is all over the place in the movie.
Yeah, you know, and also, another thing I want to point out is, you know, some of the, besides Jesse and, you know, the main characters, there's also, I want to point out his family, who I just find so odd and bizarre in their behavior.
But I want to point out his father's Gulager.
Yep, that's
right. Yeah, I'll get to that in a sec, but in the very not the very first scene, but like in the first scene we see them as a family at the breakfast table. They hear their son upstairs releasing a blood-curdling scream, and they barely react to it. It's like, that's just part of the day, you know?
Hey, I wake up like that every morning.
Yeah, I think the daughter, like, says, oh, Jesse screamed or something, and she's like, oh, Jesse's up. You know, and the father's just, like, goes back to reading his newspaper.
Yeah.
It's like, your son just screamed. Do something.
I do want to point out, like, the relationship between Jesse and Lisa in this film is, like, I like how traditionally in a lot of movies you have, like, the male character having to save his girlfriend. Here it's the complete reverse, where it's the female character having to save the male character. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, Jesse almost becomes the final girl.
Yeah. Mark Patton has actually called himself the first male Scream Queen because he is the actor is gay, and I thought that was really funny. Like, you could tell, like, he has a lot of respect for this movie, Mark Patton, and you could tell this movie really affected his life, I think.
Yeah, when they were doing the Never Sleep Again documentary, they really worked hard to locate him because he sort of, like, dropped off the face of the earth. They had really just a hard time finding him. I mean, they found him eventually. He was living in Mexico, like, doing, you know. But I think that just shows, you know, I mean, I think it's great that they found him because, you know, he gave a lot of great stories in that documentary.
I also love Robert Rusler in the movie as Jesse's friend Grady, who is one of my favorite characters ever. I just love Grady in the movie, and I love how their relationship starts out very antagonistic, where it almost comes off like Grady is going to be a bully in the movie, but no, he's actually a really awesome character.
Yeah.
And I especially love, like, when Jesse is clearly having a psychological breakdown, he's trying to calm Jesse down, like, hey man, you want to go bowling or something? Like, you could tell he really does care about this guy.
That's the one in the cafeteria, right?
Yeah.
He's chewing food at the same time.
Yeah, it's like, shut up, Grady!
Yeah, another character I really want to talk about is Coach Schneider, who is, he's one of the biggest pricks I've ever seen in a movie. I gotta tell you, you know.
Talk about sadistic.
Oh yeah, and it's implied that this guy keeps making Jesse and Grady do push-ups, you know, out in the hot sun because he, you know, gets off to it. As Grady even says while they're doing their push-ups, this is how he gets his rocks off.
Yeah. He likes pretty boys like you.
Yeah, and he goes to the S&M bars, and I gotta say, when Jesse goes there and he grabs his arm, it's like, this is outside school, dude. What are you doing?
Yeah.
You know, making him go. Yeah, I would have loved to have seen how Coach Schneider was able to get Jesse to go with him to the school to make him run laps. I mean, maybe he threatened to report him to the police for underage drinking. I don't know. But still, it's like, what? Yeah, I mean, this is not school, you know. If he tells you to start doing laps, just say, you know, no, I'm not doing that. Bullshit.
I do want to point out the actor who plays Coach Snyder.
Bell.
Yeah, he was also in Stand By Me. He played...
he's in a lot of things. He's a character in a lot of things.
I wrote to him a few times.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
he was nice enough. He was in the Christmas episode of Tales from the Crypt and All Through the House.
Okay.
He played the husband who the wife murders.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
He also was in Manhunter. He was the cop who brought Will Graham to
he was in a lot of things. I remember seeing...
House.
Yeah, he's in a lot of things. Yeah, he's a very popular character actor.
Yeah, his death scene in the movie is an interesting one because... Not only does Freddy possess Jesse, he also possesses all the gym equipment.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of funny.
Yeah, I also love, like, the line where Grady's like, yeah, and she's female and she waits for you in the cabana and you want to sleep with me.
Yeah.
Like, you could definitely see some of the gay undertones. I do think a lot of them were probably accidental, but some of them I think were definitely obvious.
Yeah, I think the writer of the movie for a while tried to insist, no, it was all just a coincidence, but then in the Never Sleep Again documentary, he admitted, yeah, I did that intentionally.
But then again, like I did point out the dance sequence in the movie. At the same time, though, there were a lot of movies in the 80s that had a lot of homoerotic undertones to them, so I don't know.
Top Gun.
Yeah.
I thought that the pool party sequence that's a really great sequence.
Yeah, that's a
when Freddy sort of traps them in there and everything like that. That's like really horrifying.
Bursts out from the ground.
Yeah, that was really well staged.
Yeah, and also not only that, but that one idiot who tries to calm him down, saying, "We'll help you."
Yeah.
We'll help you.
I'm here to help you.
I like help yourself, fucker.
And I love in that scene, Freddy's has this look on his face, like, what the hell are you doing?
I know, it's hilarious, but in a good way, not in a campy way.
I don't know, I feel like it's somewhat unintentionally hilarious. I do like that pool scene a lot, but I feel like that also sort of takes away from the scariness of Freddy, because it's like, one of the things that made the first movie so creepy was the fact that every time you saw Freddy kill somebody, it was that person and Freddy alone.
Right.
And you've got this real idea that they were, like, Nancy was really alone in her fight against Freddy. Mm-hmm. Here it's like, you have Freddy attacking all these different kids, and it's like, I don't know, it sort of takes something away, I think.
I guess I could agree with that, but at the same time, they are still terrified of him. They're all gathering in a corner, like, trying to stay away from him. Yeah. So I think it is still scary to a degree.
Mm-hmm. What do you think of Christopher Young's score in the movie?
It's good. It's good. I don't think it's as good as Charles Bernstein's score, you know. But yeah, it's adequate. It's good, you know. And Christopher, he's a good composer. The only thing is because he did Hellraiser, right? The Hellraiser film. Hellraiser. It always just bothered me because I'm a big fan of the group Coil, and they were the ones that were originally going to do the score for Hellraiser, and then they kind of got kicked off the project, and then Christopher Young took over for them. So I always held it against them. I don't know if it's fair to hold it against them, but no, he's good. I mean, I think he does good scores. You know, I don't think he's like in the tier of like great composers, but he's adequate.
Yeah. And I also want to talk about Grady's death in the movie, you know, which I think is really brutal because, you know, first of all, he has to watch helplessly, you know, as Jesse is transforming into this horrible monster, you know, similar to how Rod in the first movie had to helplessly watch as Tina was getting killed. And also, you know, he's like, I mean, he just, not only does he get stabbed, but it goes through him and the door, so that's gotta hurt.
Well, any closing thoughts on Nightmare on Elm Street 2?
Yeah, I think it's a very good entry in the series. Obviously not as good as the first, but I'll take it over some of the later entries any day.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good entry. Again, I think it's interesting that it became better for me once I found out more about the behind the scenes, the making of it, or the intentions, or the themes. It became even more interesting to me after finding out about those things than in my initial viewing.
Just one more quick thing I want to mention about the movie that I just remember now is that when they filmed, toward the end of the pool party scene where Freddy kind of makes his exit and, you know, fire like erupts. I remember reading in Robert Englund's autobiography that he was very nervous about doing that scene, you know, because he's working near fire. And I remember either the director or some other crew member said, you know, you gotta just walk through it because Freddy fucking Krueger isn't afraid of fire. And he just responded, well, Robert fucking Englund is.
Here's Mark Allen Gunnell's thoughts on Nightmare on Elm Street 2.
The second movie, Freddy's Revenge, that was a movie I didn't like when I was younger, but has grown on me as I've gotten older until now. I really enjoy it. What I like about Freddy's Nightmare is that it's a sequel that doesn't just try to copy the original. It actually tries to do its own thing and tell its own story. In some ways, it's more of a possession tale, with Freddy Krueger trying to take over the body of the hero, Mark, in the movie. And, I'm sorry, Jesse. Mark was the actor who played him. But I thought that was an interesting way to go. There's some very creepy scenes in it. I think the opening on the bus is wonderful. Just little moments like when he opens the door to his younger sister's bedroom, and she's dressed all in white, jump roping, singing the Freddy song. The film is also noted for its homoerotic nature, which is definitely there. The screenwriter was gay, the lead actor was gay, but I also thought that was interesting and something you didn't see in a lot of mainstream horror films at the time. So I liked the different direction they tried to take it.
Here are Chris's thoughts on the second Nightmare on Elm Street movie.
2 and 5 are the ones that get the most shit, and I see why, but this one I think does deserve like a second look because it tried something different from the first one where Freddy is now in effect kind of possessing somebody, kind of getting him to do his bidding, and it's freaky to watch, especially from Jesse's point of view. The scene that really sticks out to me is the scene where Freddy kills the gym teacher. Just like, you know, he's in the shower, like chained up, and then like the slash marks just go down his back. It's really fucked up and really off-putting. And then like in that one really freaky bit just after, like Jesse realizes the glove is in his hand. You know, it's like just imagine yourself being in that situation, kind of going back to the first one where you try to imagine yourself being in that situation. And yeah, I do like this one, despite the fact that a lot of people kind of look down on it. There's a lot of great scenes in it, especially the one that really sticks out, and then I think about it again, is the scene where Freddy just starts like pulling his scalp off and you can see the brain underneath. That is just insane effects work, and it looks so fucked up and so cool. The ending is kind of like weak, but it's to be expected, I guess. And what's really weird is if you watch these in kind of sequential order, it really feels closed off from the other ones. Like, each one kind of bounces off the other one that came before it really well, but this one, it's sort of just almost like a very isolated chapter from the rest of them, because it's weird that nobody really mentions Jesse in any of the other ones, or that, like, Freddy did come back before the events of Dream Warriors. You know, it's kind of weird that it just kind of falls by the wayside. Maybe they were doing that because they felt nobody thought highly of the second one, but I enjoy it, and it definitely deserves a second watch.
And here are John's thoughts on Nightmare 2.
I think it's a decent sequel. I mean, it's not the best of the series, but it's a pretty decent, like, follow-up and solid. Like, the character Jesse, just like Nancy in the first film, very likable, and you very root for him. Like, you feel bad how, like, Freddy's trying to take over his body to become Jesse, and you're like, oh no. And Jesse and Kim Myers' character have good chemistry and good relationship, and when you look at her, she kind of resembles a little bit of Meryl Streep when you think about it. That's the reason why she got this part, because people said that you look like Meryl Streep. That's why you're in this movie.
So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you enjoyed this video overall. That was my review on A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge, and my next movie review will be on A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors.